Hello and welcome to Clickbait. I am Matt and today we're talking about one of my all-time favourite cameras. Yes, this, the Nikon F4. Now this is a kind of an unusual one because in many respects this is the unloved stepchild. This is the piggy in the middle, the forgotten professional Nikon F series camera, but not to me. To me this has always been the dream, the halo, the one to have. So why don't people love it as much as I do? And why do I love it so much as I do? Well, let's stick around and find out. So first of all, let's put this into some kind of time-based context. The late 1980s, this dropped in 1988 and it looked like an alien had landed. From the end of the 1970s, throughout the 80s, cameras have been getting more and more advanced at a very, very rapid rate. Auto exposure modes, autofocus was finally starting to make an appearance. Minolta and Canon really did get the jump on Nikon, poor old Nikon, early on in the game. The Minolta Dynax, or Maxim if you're in America, 7000 appeared in 1985 and took the world by storm. It was the most advanced, cleverest autofocus anyone had ever seen because really, apart from the weird bolt-on things, it was the only autofocus they'd ever seen. Canon jumped in a little ahead of time again with the EOS range. The EOS 600 was really very much another of my dream cameras, and one of the earliest videos on this channel was in fact my EOS 600, which I still do use fairly regularly. But this, I wasn't a Nikon guy back then. I was very much a Minolta guy back in the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, because I thought their technology was out of this world. Nikon were the serious photographer's camera. It's press photography, weddings, reportage, all that kind of thing. So when autofocus arrived on this, it was something a little bit unusual for them. Canon, because their autofocus was so fast, they really took a jump into that sports photography world, which they hung on to for many, many years after that. Nikon had really lost a bit of footing at this point, so they had to do something very, very clever, and they did this, the Nikon F4. Now, looking at the design, first of all, you'll notice it is, well, it's that bridge between the days of the old film cameras, dials for everything, and the new generation of automated everything. This is very much the missing link, the undiscovered or forgotten place to go for all that kind of bridge position, because it feels like both in its own funny sort of way. But the F4 basically did everything built in, whereas a lot of the functions like autofocus and motor drive had been bolt-on extras, especially for its predecessors like the F3. This now brought everything into its new sleek Giugiaro designed body. This is proper industrial design. And a little side note, if you look at the styling of this and the styling of things like the EOS 620 and the 600, that really has set the design language for those brands for the next, what, 40 years? They still look kind of remarkably similar. They follow similar traits. The Nikons have got a chunkier, more angular design, whereas the Canons have got that smoother, sleeker design language. They haven't veered away from that in all those years. I don't know if there is a category of tank camera, but if there is, this is a prime candidate for it. It's built around an alloy metal frame covered in a grippy rubber surface on the outside, and it is designed to be indestructible. It's the kind of camera where if you're at a press scrum outside a courthouse and someone comes for you, you can use the camera as a bolus and a weapon. After you've clubbed someone to the ground with it, you can pick it up, wipe it down, and still keep taking photos. Looking at the controls, I love how it bridges the gap between the old mechanical era and the new electronic one. And it does everything the old Nikon F3 could do, but loads more that the new generation of automated cameras could as well. It is the stepping stone from the old world to the new, but it does it with incredible Giugiaro styling, so this thing is also a fashion accessory. It's one of the best looking cameras I think I've ever seen. But this thing was absolutely loaded. I mean, there were so many features and things on here that blew people's minds at the time. I was still using a manual Chinon from the 1970s, so it was like me riding a BMX and being excited about the new Ferrari. This was utterly unattainable. But now, move on a couple of decades, because this isn't the one that the collectors covet, it's actually surprisingly affordable. I mean, people who want the old-fashioned analog film feel, they will go for things like the F2 and the F3. The F3 is still a remarkably usable manual focus camera, and it's almost indestructible. And people who want the fully automated kind of lifestyle, but with film, they will go for the F5 that replaced it. This, though, sits awkwardly in the middle, because although it was very, very advanced, it does handle a bit like a film camera, but I like that because we've got a dial for everything. We've got a shutter speed dial on the top, but we do have shutter priority and aperture priority, of course. That's accessible by a big lever here. Every single function on this camera has its own bespoke lever or dial, and many of them are locked, so you have to push a release tag so you can't inadvertently nudge it. So if you want to change it from shutter speed, that one fortunately you can do on its own. However, if you want to put exposure compensation on there, you have to push the detent, otherwise you can't do that. I love the Fuji X series, for example, but they've got that big prominent exposure compensation dial on the top right of the top plate, and every time I use one I wind up nudging it and underexposing or overexposing a few frames before I realise what I've done. With this, you can't do that. Because this is a professional camera, it's designed to be used in situations where you probably are only going to get one shot to get the shot, and you can't afford to make mistakes. So you have everything dialed in as you want it, and the camera remembers how you liked it and how you wanted it, and so it doesn't make mistakes. But also, because it is a professional grade camera, it allows you to do things that other cameras of this era, say things like the EOS 600, which was maybe better autofocus, this lets you do stuff that they can't. For example, as well as the DX coding on the film, if you're new to film, DX is when your camera automatically reads what the film speed is and sets it for you, so you haven't got to manually remember to do that. But in addition to that, it has got the highest and lowest non-DX manual film speed settings of any camera I think I've ever seen. It will go down to ISO 6 on the dial and up all the way to, hang on, ISO 6400. Generally though, I do leave it on DX. But as well as those kind of automated features, it does have a lot of mechanical feeling things. For example, it has a readout in the viewfinder that tells you what the shutter speed is, what the exposure is, what the aperture is, but it tells you what the aperture is by using a little window and a little prism in the bottom of the viewfinder, which reads and actually shows you the physical aperture ring on the lens. And this brings me to its greatest strength, but also its greatest weakness. The lenses. Because it's a Nikon F camera, you can go back to 1959 and use virtually any Nikon F lens ever. It will mount up and it'll work to a degree. Anything up to the Z series of very, very recent will work on there. That's only because the depth from the back of a Z lens, how it focuses, to the film plane or the digital plane isn't adaptable. It's already too close to be adapted, which is why you can adapt F to Z, because they need to be slightly further away. The only downside is when you get to lenses like the G series, which don't have an aperture ring, you can't change the aperture because it hasn't got, like modern cameras, little control wheels at the front or the back. All I've got is my serial number telling me this is 217554. And if anyone knows anything about Nikons, they can probably tell me when this was made. But like previous professional Nikons, it was as adaptable as you could possibly hope for it to be. It comes with a built-in motor drive and it's got multiple speed settings on that. You can do single shot, continuous high, continuous low, and the top shutter speed is 1/8000th of a second, so your sports photographers are gonna love that. You've also got X, T and B modes, so lots of options for holding the shutter open, and it's got a metered setting down to 4 seconds on the dial itself. So if you want to do like astrophotography or long exposure photography, it really has got you covered. Now, obviously, you can change the lenses. That's a given. It's an SLR. You can change the heads as well. You can have a waist level finder. You can change the focusing screens. And the back of this, you have a shutter. So if you're shooting long exposure and you don't want light straying in and affecting or refracting through and getting into the film, you can close that little shutter to protect your exposure. Very, very clever indeed. And because it's a professional camera, you're probably using flash of some kind, as well as the hot shoe on the top. You've got an X-Sync cable. So if you're using a thing like an old Metz big old hammerhead flash gun with a quantum battery on the side, you can use that. You can connect it to that and it'll be like a flat sync speed of like 125th or 250th of a second. Now, I love the ergonomics of this particular camera, and Nikon have really stuck with the bulk of the positioning of the buttons 40 odd years later. So after using, say, a Nikon D850 or a Nikon D3 or a Z8, I can use this camera just immediately because everything is very much intuitively in almost exactly the same place. And as I say, there is a button for everything. You've got auto focus lock, you've got auto exposure lock, you've got depth of field preview. Honestly, there are so many options. You can even buy it in 3 different body forms. So this version with no grip on the bottom is the MB20 version, and that just uses 4 AA batteries which slot into the grip. That's brilliant. The battery life isn't necessarily the best, but AA batteries are freely available everywhere, and if you're on a job you can take boxes of them and keep on going all day. Then there was the MB21, which added a full hand grip, when it was the first Nikon to have a hand grip with a side mounted shutter button for vertical shooting. That gave you 6 AA batteries and boosted the shutter speed a little bit longer and gave you longer working life, but it did mean even more weight to carry. Bear in mind, this thing weighs over 1 kilogram on its own without you adding a lens to it. Then there was the F4E, which added a NiCad battery option. Bear in mind, this is the 80s, so battery technology is still in its infancy. And there was the MB24, which was a data back, so you can take off your film back and it would impress a little light up version of whatever you typed on the back, so you could type messages and details onto the film. It's more for sort of scientific, police, that kind of data use rather than general shooting. It really does mess up your holiday photos when you've got the time and date stamped in the bottom, we now find. Nikon even made a one-off digital back version of this for NASA to take into space on the shuttle. It only had a 1024 by 1024 pixel CCD sensor, but it was pretty exciting back in, what's that, 1990 or so. So this was the first ever professional spec Nikon that didn't have a film wind-on lever. It was the first one with built-in motor drive from the factory. Previously, if you're a professional photographer and you wanted motor drive, you had to buy an F3 and the big old bolt-on battery underneath. And also, if you wanted to go to autofocus on a Nikon, you had to go and get yourself a consumer level camera like the F501 from 1985, and then the F801, which I think just pipped this to the post. So why isn't this loved? Well, the thing is, people looking for that nostalgic film camera feel will go for the F3. People looking for the more modern feel will go for the F5, leaving this in the middle. So both of those cameras will start from a minimum of 250, nearer £300 for a scruffy example, and head on up to closer to 1,000. I picked this fully working camera up for 130 quid on eBay. And I say fully working like I should be surprised, but really I shouldn't. Although it has got lots of electronics inside it, there's nothing like the usual things which fail, like LCDs are the most common failure. The film wind-on counter is mechanical. There is a little LCD telling you your shutter speed and things inside, but that's your lot. So a lot of the features are incredibly advanced for the time. For example, it's got 3 exposure modes. It's got spot meter, center weighted, and evaluative, which is incredibly clever for 1988. The focusing uses TTL phase detection, but it's only got one focusing zone, so that means you have to find your subject, lock it, and then move to position, then fire, which can be a little bit troublesome if you're doing sport. However, it does track surprisingly well. As I say, I've always loved the Nikon F4. Back when I was at school and you couldn't buy stickers of everything on the internet because there wasn't the internet, I had a picture of a Nikon F4 cut out and stuck on the front of my folder in the photography class, along with a picture of a Hasselblad 501. This is the camera I definitely prefer to use though. I've loved them so much for so long that as soon as this arrived and I was heading off on holiday, this is the camera I thought I'm going to pack. Was a 1 kilogram plus camera without a lens the ideal camera to be traipsing around Italy in 40°C heat? Probably not, but the pictures were superb. It got every single one nailed just right. Focus was right, exposure was right. It feels good in your hand. It weighs a bit on your shoulder, certainly when you're traipsing around with it, but boy, does it feel good in your hand. And of course, I've been using Nikons for many, many years, so I've got lots of Nikon lenses, although most of them admittedly are now G series. So now I need to go back and rebuy the lenses I had years ago to complete this set. So if you are a Nikon user and a lover of film, would I recommend running out and buying yourself a Nikon F4? Well, yes, I would. And obviously I would say the F5 is a better camera, because it is. Because not only did the F5 replace it, it was actually outlived by the Nikon F3. It's a bit like the Volvo 200 in that it replaced both the 700 that replaced it and the 900 that replaced it. And if I really wanted the fully modern Nikon feel, I would jump all the way to a Nikon F6, which I have to say I did have in my camera bag for a long time, and one of my many biggest regrets in terms of photography equipment, it belonged to a company which closed down, and when it closed down I took all my equipment back and it turned out they didn't know I had it, so I could have kept it. You live and learn, eh? Don't give stuff back until you're asked. I don't know, that's probably not a great lesson to take away, is it? Anyway, what I have learnt though is that some things are worth waiting for. I loved the Nikon F4 for many, many years. When I first started working in photography, a lot of my senior photographer colleagues used these things and adored them, and with good reason. Me though, I was stuck into the Minolta series because I knew that the Minolta series was at the time more technologically advanced. It just wasn't as robust and tough as the Nikons. moving on a couple of years' time, who had the last laugh because Sony bought Minolta for their AF technology, and that's what became the Sony Alpha series, which is what became all of what Sony mirrorless is now. Nikon have taken quite a while to catch up with their Zs, which I'm ridiculously still using. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this look at this beautiful piece of nostalgic 90s or 80s technology, which is a camera I have wanted for so long, and I'm so happy I now have in my camera bag. And believe it or not, this has become one of my most used non-digital cameras because it just feels so good. Yes, it is heavy. Yes, it's a pain to carry, but it's a joy to use, even if it is a little bit slow and a little bit clunky sometimes compared to new cameras. But then it's 40 odd years old. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please of course hit like and subscribe, and check out the other videos here on clickbait. For example, going for a walk down the river with a new tripod and trying not to fall in a couple of days ago. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Goodbye.